Yep, we're talking all about drinking today. Drinking safely, that is. Here on Flying for Flavor. So we've covered some pretty serious topics over the last few episodes, so I thought we need to get back into some fun. I've got a whole pile of traveling planned up for the next little while. A lot of it is revolving around wine. So I thought that with all this travel planning I'm doing and trying to plan out not just where and when I'm going to be somewhere, but I'm always trying to be safe and I'm always trying to plan ahead for my transportation needs. And because there's going to be a lot of socializing for most people over the next couple of months, I thought now would be the good time to get everybody up to speed on the options that are available, some tips and tricks, and just to make sure that everybody is safe during the holiday season. So I'm really busy planning right now for November, December, and January of 2018, believe it or not. And my calendar's getting full of events and private wine classes, cocktail parties. But it just takes some stamina, of course, some planning for good health choices because I can be known to overindulge. And I really want to make sure that I enjoy my season with friends, family, and colleagues. So I'm going to include a lot of tips this episode. They're going to be from not just for myself, but I'm also bringing back Cynthia Loisel-Sege, who you met back in that tipping episode. We also had a chance that same day over mimosas to chat a little bit about drinking, of course, and how we can do it safely. So I kept the recording going for a little bit so we can have a little more in-depth conversation for this episode. And of course, I am bringing back my secret servers from here in the Sudbury area, just to sort of give you their point of view on what they're seeing here in Sudbury, but it might also apply to your town or city, wherever you're listening. So let's start off with a little chat with Cynthia and see what this whole drinking thing is about nowadays. Okay, so we're going to talk drinking. What a shock. We're always talking drinking.
I don't know anything about drinking.
You know anything about drinking. But no. So this is, I wanted to discuss just from the event management perspective and then also working in food service. Basically, this entire topic is about how the hospitality industry deals with intoxication, different styles of drinks, how things have changed over the years. Just your general thoughts on drinking as a business. I noticed that a couple of things. I think it's still, I want to say our generation and older who are still the big drinkers. I have this funny magnet on my fridge. I was trying to hide it from my dad. It basically says, gone are the days where women cook like their mothers. This girl drinks like her father.
And that quick thing, frankly, I think is the foundation of our friendship. Through drinking with my father and myself, we become good friends.
I was going to say, wait a minute, did I meet your dad around the same time?
You did.
Okay, that just sums it up. Okay, that's funny. So I remember back when I had the catering business and we decided to get into bar services and making sure all of our team had Smart Serve because the rule basically is that you needed to have, at least at the time, I don't think
you had to have one person on site.
One person had Smart Serve. Mm-hmm. So I had it and then I had Alex have it, of course. So there was two of us, but there was sometimes we had 4 events the same night. Yeah. So we were always making sure. So the easiest thing to do was anybody over a certain age, you must go do Smart Serve.
We do the same thing. All of our team are Smart Serve certified.
Mm-hmm. And it makes things a lot easier just so they know the basics. There's been very few times that I've ever seen any of our team having to use it. Maybe because we were in a different environment. We weren't working in a bar necessarily. It was usually weddings, corporate events, that kind of thing. There was a couple of times where they had to use judgment calls and there was some creativity. I am going to talk to Alex about this later to get his perspective on some stories, but I know that there was one time at a wedding, instead of cutting somebody off, he basically would just, he started with there's a certain, maximum of so many drinks he'd sell to one particular person, or even if it's open bar, you can't come up and get 4 drinks. You can't come up and get 2 bottles of wine,
Yeah.
right? By the bottle.
And it's things like, it's interesting that you mentioned that you haven't had issues with weddings. The bulk of what I do, larger portion of my business is wedding. And then I do corporate and smaller personal events. And the biggest difference when it comes to weddings is open bar versus cash bar. When the host is covering the cost of the alcohol versus when the guests are covering the cost of alcohol. And when it comes to having to make those decisions about how you can serve someone in a polite, respectful manner, but not say you can't have any more alcohol because you are too blitzo, you do things like serving it in the larger cups instead of the smaller cups, so they're getting more mix or giving them less ice, so they're getting more mix instead of less alcohol. Slower service, so taking a little bit longer to get their drinks to them, so it's giving them a chance to kind of have a little bit of breathing in between, shooting them back, not serving more than 1 or 2 drinks per person, not serving doubles.
That's the interesting thing about doubles, because I know our city bylaws, that's one of the rules for any of the city-owned halls or venues, was that they couldn't serve doubles. So it annoys people. It's basically, we can give you, if you want to come up and order two rye
at once.
That's right. You can go ahead and do that. We're going to give you 2 cups with 2 rye. If you decide you're going to pour 1 cup into the other,
there's nothing we can do about it.
Nothing we can do about it, but we're not serving you more doubles. We're not going to do, and that same thing, you start getting into shooters and everything else. It can get a little out of hand.
Very much so.
But we haven't, I think we were so paranoid about it. And I found that, especially in the last few years, where a lot of the millennials were starting to be at the weddings and the ones getting married, they're not necessarily the big drinkers that we had to worry about.
That's true.
I always found it was the... I want to say the parents or grandparents were usually the ones.
Everybody has that drunk uncle. Yeah. There's one at every wedding. He's at the end of the bar. He's drinking too much and he's hitting on everything that moves. Sorry, guys. It is what it is.
It is what it is. Okay, we didn't get too much in depth when it came to weddings. I want to save that for an entire other episode series coming up in the new year, right around the time all those bridal shows are happening, and you're going to be getting those invitations in the mail if you are attending weddings, or you're going to start your planning process if you're planning to get married 2018 and beyond. So a couple of things that she mentioned too. Yes, there's generations of things that are happening. The millennials are less drinkers, because all the stats that I've been seeing, I do follow a lot of industry magazines, things online and in print, and I'm noticing that the alcohol sales across the board in Canada are down slightly over the last several years. And I do think it's because people are being a little bit more choosy on what they're consuming, as opposed to just grabbing whatever 6-pack they can get at a corner store or from whatever shelf that's selling them. So it's actually interesting to see how things change. We're going to talk a little bit about now about the dealing with intoxicated people at events, just from our perspective as somebody who's been on the other side of the bar serving other people. And a couple of the tips that I wanted to mention, I am going to include some great recipes actually in the show notes. So there's going to be, there's one that's great for party season to put in a punch bowl. It's called my mock champagne. I did list the source, I believe, if I found it from a particular magazine or something. I do tend to collect recipes as I read things here and there. And there's another one for a pineapple agua fresca, which I thought is a little exotic and a little fun. There's also one that's just a low alcohol version. It's like an apricot and vanilla. It's almost like a float. You know, you've probably had a float when you were a kid where you have just a base liquid or soft drink or something, and then there's ice cream but on it. Well, this is a little bit more of a grown-up version, and you add a little bit of sparkling wine, and that's the only alcohol that's in it. So it's very decadent. It's a little more adult. But it's still something that's a lot of fun that you can serve over the holidays. And the cool thing is you can do the apricot and vanilla part only without having the sparkling wine in it for the kids, and then you could just top your own up with some bubbles. So I think it's a good alternative, so everybody's sort of enjoying the same thing. And I'm also going to include, there's some other tips for bartending for the season, just so that you want to set up your own home bar to make sure that you have everything ready to go and just make things a little bit more streamlined for you for this busy season of entertaining. So a couple of tips that have always worked for me, and this is kind of the things that I've always trained my staff over the years. If you're going to an event and you need to save face, especially for those office Christmas parties, the ones where you actually have to talk to people who are higher ranking than you, or other coworkers or spouses you've never met before, it may not be the time for you to start ordering doubles at the bar, unless you have that kind of a business. But for most people, it's not. So usually my rule of thumb when I'm going to those events is 1 drink to 1 water or 1 non-alcoholic beverage. So for every time I order 1 glass of wine or something, I always make sure I have a water with it. And I've even been finding I'm doing that a lot now, even when I'm dining out someplace, is that I'll kind of switch it up here and there so that you're not just sitting there and just drinking alcohol straight from the time that you sat down or the time you arrived somewhere until the time you leave. I'm not a huge fan of shooters. There's a time and place for them. A lot of events, especially if you're the one that's serving alcohol at your home, I usually try to keep that rule of allowing for shooters by keeping things at a minimum. You can always have lower alcohol wines or sparkling wines. There's some really great dry ones out there. So lower alcohol contents allows you to have maybe a larger glass just to celebrate or toast in the new year. I know this whole pregame thing is a big deal, drinking before you go out. But if you're trying to keep yourself not fuzzy-headed for the evening, then maybe wait and have your alcohol when you arrive at the event, as opposed to trying to have so much ahead of time, because then you start to lose your inhibitions a little bit and start having this self-talk that, oh, I feel fine right now, I can have 2 more. And it's surprising how quickly it can kick in if you're not paying attention. And this may sound interesting, but I always kind of find it funny that people are always complaining about going to these bars or restaurants that have these new complicated molecular gastronomy style cocktails because it takes so long to concoct them. But if you are trying to limit the amount of alcohol you're consuming, actually treating yourself to something that is over the top and spectacular and may take a little longer to produce will also have you appreciating it and maybe sipping it a little slower. So don't shy away from those. And then, of course, my last tip, of course, is planning your ride ahead. There is no excuse anymore for drinking and driving. I still get stunned when I hear about or I'm reading in newspapers or anything about casualties and fatalities and charges that are being laid, and it's from all age groups. It's not one or the other. And there's really no reason anymore with all of the mobile apps and devices and businesses that are out there. There's always somebody who's willing to give you a ride. And there's a lot of economic versions. And if you have to, it's a matter of planning ahead where you choose a place close to home so that maybe you can walk or take public transportation, or you arrange for someone else to come and pick you up later. Or if you're going with a group, then you can all chip in and maybe order not just a taxi or Uber service or other kind of shared ride platform, but you can also look at the new designated driver services that are not just in Ontario, but basically all over North America. So at the Christmas holidays, they used to have them up for charities only. Here in Sudbury, we have a Red Nose system where the months during the holiday season, if you needed a ride after an event, Red Nose basically uses volunteers and a donation system to make sure everyone gets home safely during the holiday season. But there are actually businesses out there now that do this 365 days of the year. So if you are interested in looking at those kind of things ahead of time, a lot of them have mobile apps, so you can actually have it set up on your phone before you leave, and then there's no excuse. So even when you're at an event and you realize that you forgot, you can actually pre-plan and ask for a ride at a particular time. A lot of them do offer pre-bookings, which makes the whole thought process and decision-making even easier. So I've listed just about every designated driver service in Ontario that I could find online so that you have easy, quick links and a list. They'll all be on the show notes. So just make sure you check out the show notes at stephaniepichet.ca/flavor10. And as always, it is spelled the Canadian way, FLAVOUR 10. So is there any particular tips for looking for the wedding planning phase? I don't want to go too much into weddings. We'll do a whole other episode. So it's a matter of how do you handle intoxicated guests in a way that, so whether it's a house party, whether you're traveling, you're in a restaurant, how do you suggest servers should be doing it? When I talked to our secret server group, they didn't really have a whole lot of instances where they've had to deal with it in restaurants here specifically.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that something that servers who are specifically, serving the actual alcohol on a regular basis have to recognize is that it's not just the owners of the restaurant or the chain or whatever that have responsibility for the patrons in your establishment, that the server themselves are directly responsible as well for, or the bartender, for the condition that guests are leaving. Whenever you hear of lawsuits that are happening when someone has been hurt or something tragic has happened after a night out, it's not just the restaurant owner, typically the bartender, the server, whoever had anything to do with that service is responsible. So when you're thinking about it that way, it's very easy to get caught up in the drunker they are, the better the tips and that kind of thing, which sadly is a lot of what I see and hear in the event industry here. It's recognizing that it's great that this person's going to buy more booze and therefore give you higher tips, but how are you going to feel if they do leave and they do something inappropriate? So definitely recognizing if someone is already showing those signs that you learn through Smart Serve, and things like slower service, where maybe you're not pumping out those drinks as quickly to them, and recognizing that maybe you'll serve a few other people before you come to that person. So it gives them kind of a chance, maybe put a glass of water in front of them while they're waiting. Be with you in just a second, here's a glass of water kind of thing. Serving it in larger cups with more mix, less ice, so that it's slowing down the amount that they're drinking at once as well. We had talked about not doing the doubles, not doing shooters on the bar at a certain period. And you have the right as a server to say that in a respectful manner. I handle a lot of those situations with humor. Yeah, I totally hear you. I know what you mean. Here, just grab this glass of water for a second, or I'll just be another minute with that drink and it's okay. And developing that rapport with them so that you're not like, you're too drunk, you can't have alcohol. Well, then the person's now upset. It's created a really negative experience. But finding that kind of happy medium between joking and laughing and developing a rapport with them, so you can take a little bit longer. You can serve those bigger drinks to them. And I know the cups got bigger. What's up with that? So that they're seeing that. And the other thing, of course, is making sure that you're recognizing if someone's got a set of keys in their hands. Take those keys away. I don't care how much you're worried about upsetting them or hurting their feelings. Take those keys. Find a way to get whoever the sober person is in the group to handle it if you're not comfortable doing it. Providing them calling taxis. We certainly have a taxi number programmed into all of our phones, ready to call in case we feel someone isn't able to get home. And by the time you've developed that rapport, they're more open to hearing what you have to say when you're suggesting that maybe they find an alternate route home.
Yeah, I think that's, we just had a situation. I was at a restaurant while I was traveling. We were sitting at the bar having our little pre-cocktail, and I noticed there was a gentleman and he was getting a little belligerent, cheering a little loudly at things that were inappropriate. He was there by himself. He almost looked like he just wandered to the place because he saw there was a bar and decided to sit, because it was a fairly classy restaurant, and this guy's clothes were kind of like he just got off work and, in baseball hat on and whatever. And so he was sitting at the end of the bar by himself, but I think he just getting to be a little louder. And I could see the three bartenders who were obviously very experienced. Well, two of them were. The one gentleman who was not, or the bartender who was not as experienced, I did notice how he got really nervous on how to handle it, to the point where he was not handling it at all.
Yeah.
And one of the other guys kind of stepped in. And the other two were very jovial in their way of, not just addressing the rest of the group or the other bartenders. They were always cracking jokes here and there. So it was an automatic, I think you need to go find another place to go drink.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to have the drinks that you like here. I think you need to. So they just kept sort of coaxing. Then finally, when he started getting his bill paid, I think he only had one drink by the time the situation happened. So he obviously was drinking
somewhere else. Yeah.
But I think that was the only thing that bothered me at the end, because even my husband commented that he was really impressed with how they handled the situation. It didn't disturb the rest of the guests. Maybe people at the bar noticed. And the manager kind of escorted him out. And he was very loud with his, I guess you don't want me here, and all that kind of thing. But again, it was how do you know how he was
getting home? Yeah.
Or, and maybe he wasn't getting home, but where do you draw that line with, okay, well, how do I need to follow him out the door? Right? And this was an area where there's not a lot of vehicles. Like, you almost had to walk there to get there. So it's very possible that he wasn't necessarily driving anyways. But again, it's still, as somebody working on the other side of that, I get nervous about.
Very much so.
Yeah, he wasn't just slurring. This guy was done.
And you need to, and I think it's really important to recognize it. I think certainly years of experience, certainly you can tell pretty quickly if someone's eyes are a little bit glassy or if their words are a little bit funny or they're walking a little bit slower. We had a situation at a previous wedding not too long ago where the grandfather of the groom had clearly had too much. And my assistant actually looked at me and she's like, really, do you think he's not just old? I went, no, he's not just old. He was not walking like that when he walked in. And it's really important to be able to see and recognize those signs of intoxication.
Yes.
And be okay with saying, I really respect that you would like a drink from my establishment, but I really value you as a person. And I would really suggest, let me get you a ride home and we'll find a way to work this out for you. And the jovial way of like I said, handling it with joking and having some fun. Yeah, I totally agree. I know, right? We're such jerks. We don't want to let you have a drink. I know.
Yes.
But let's get you home safely and hopefully you can come back and visit us another day. And I think that realistically as adults, there's only so much you can do as from one adult to another. But at least if you're doing your due diligence by calling them a cab or offering them a ride, we've got, is it driver safe here in Sudbury?
Driver seat
here in Sudbury, where you can call and someone will actually come and drive your vehicle home with you. Offer those options and be prepared and ready to follow up with it. But you're right, you can't follow everyone home either. So I think ultimately it's about making sure that you're serving them responsibly in the first place.
Yes, that's right. You doing your job there. And I think that was one of the things that I was impressed with. There was a lot of situations that Alex was in over the years that his rationale was actually pretty wise for a young chap. Mm-hmm. He would say, you know what, they're probably not going to be happy with me at that moment, but at least they're getting home. And he said they were probably that drunk that they'll forget about in the morning anyways.
100%.
Right? So it's a matter of what's the best option at the time being. And yes, I'm going to have to make that call.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's always a hard thing to stop someone from having fun. But that's the whole thing, is that there's always that magic line in the sand where you're going from having fun to
being unsafe.
Yeah, unsafe.
Yeah.
And unsafe is not good for anybody. So before we continue, I just wanted to make a little note about what both Cynthia and I always kind of preach to our own staff over the years, and that is making sure that anyone who is going to be serving alcohol, even if it's just part-time, casual, or whatever, you should have your Smart Serve. I know that everyone who worked for me had their Smart Serve, especially if they were of legal age to serve alcohol, and I even recommend it to people who I'm talking to who are not necessarily in the hospitality industry or going to be serving alcohol as part of their everyday job, but they may have been asked to volunteer at a wedding to help out with the bar. They may have been asked to, bartend at the company Christmas party. There are many occasions where you could be asked to serve alcohol, and just having that peace of mind that you are up to date on what the current allowed limits are, some tips on how to handle someone who is intoxicated, what the actual proper steps are, who is liable for what, etc. It's very easy to do. It's all available online. All you have to do is visit the website at smartserve.ca. It's $34.95 for the first time that you get this little card and certification. But if you need to recertify later, just because you've done it the first time, you can actually do it again for $24.95. So it's actually a really reasonable cost for peace of mind. So again, that website is smartserve.ca. And of course, even easier, I provided the link on the show notes. You know what that sound is. It's called Fly in My Soup. This is the time of the episode where I get to rant a little bit. But if you've been listening so far, you already realize I'm ranting a little bit about drinking and driving. So this time I want to be a little bit more specific when it comes to wine regions. I have known of many wine regions I've visited in the last few years that still do not have a lot of taxi companies, Uber's not in their town, and they may have a few limo service companies available, but other than that, most types of transportation are pretty much non-existent. As an example, I'm heading to Prince Edward County this weekend, and there's only 4 of us, and my brother and I have been spending crazy amount of time trying to arrange for taxi service. We didn't need a large limo. There's only 4 of us. We managed to find a taxi that would take us around for the afternoon, but we only got that booked last week, and we've been planning this trip for quite some time. So it's one of those things that, again, not just planning ahead for your own transportation within your own city or town, but make sure that you're doing it when you're out touring around and traveling as well. So I'm going to put a little shout out and ask maybe winery owners or those who are working or have contacts in their own local wine associations. And that's not just here in Southern Ontario. Those wineries can do this as well. But if you're listening out in Halifax or out on the West Coast or even down in the United States, if you have a wine region nearby, or if you produce wine, or if you work in a tasting room, or if you work at a wine event, if there's not enough transportation in your area, it would be a great idea to boost your own tourism for the wine industry in your region if you have more options for safe transportation. And one of the things I'm going to suggest is that designated driver service. There are many companies. I know we have them here in Canada, especially in Ontario, so I'm assuming they're all over North America. A lot of them have a franchise model so that if somebody wanted to open their own business, not only can they provide employment to the local economy, it would help out the winery owners, it will help out the industry in that area, and it will make sure that everyone who visits your wine region is actually safe and excited about coming back the next time. Talk about for drinks has to do with drunk people. So even if you're not a restaurant that turns into a bar at night, when you're just open for regular daytime hours or the standard restaurant hours, how often are you finding it's a seasonal thing? Are you finding it's more than it used to be? Are you finding intoxication, or you're finding there's a level of it? Are these wine drunks or booze drunks, ball team beer drunks, tequila shots? Just out of curiosity, just what's happening here in Northern Ontario, I'm just curious.
For us, I find we don't really get a lot of people who come in to get drunk because we're not really a place that you come to get drunk.
I was just going to say, I've never planned it.
We don't.
It's one of those, you're right, it's like a night when I'm not planning it, I'm just coming for a quick drink and stays for 4 hours.
But I mean, I'm assuming just for like any servers, we're not really there to serve you to get drunk. So I don't find we go past that level. And I mean, I've been there since we've opened, and can't recall of someone having a table being super difficult with being overly drunk or drinking too much and they need to cut them off. I mean, maybe because I'm not always on the bar side, there may be more going on the bar side I'm not aware of, but for us, I don't really find we get a lot of people coming in to get drunk.
Well, again, it's never someone's intention.
But do
you have policies set aside or that you're trained on that when this kind of happens, not like basically not a smart serve policy, but just a standard across the board, this is our restaurant policy?
Not really. I think if anyone finds themselves in that situation, they kind of just run to a manager and then they go out and kind of deal with the situation.
Yep, management for sure.
It's definitely a better place for a manager to step in than it is for a server because
need somebody with authority.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that we're the good guy all the time.
Oh yes, you're the one giving the tips too. You don't want to be that bad guy.
Well,
Having somebody else being the bad guy who's on salary is fantastic.
Well, and the other thing is trusting a server who's relying on tips to make the right decision in that case, gets a little bit murky based on the person. Not saying that servers are bad people, but, everyone makes decisions. And when it comes down to, well, maybe I shouldn't serve them anymore, but I'm going to because if I don't, they're not going to tip me, it just, having that outside person come in and deal with it helps you save, because you could be like, oh, it's not me.
Okay, so now you know if you ever see a manager approaching your table. So for those who are dining out, you may not realize what kind of a balance there is with trying to serve you what you want and making sure that you're safe. Sometimes it's not an easy task, and I always commend all the servers on how they do this on a daily basis. So this is the time of the episode where we're going to do a table topic before we close for the day. And of course, since I'm going on my big wine tasting tour over the next several weeks, I thought I would choose from the Wine Table Topics box. So today's question is, how often do you disagree with the rating of a wine with a high score? So for those who haven't noticed, if you go to the LCBO or your local liquor store, a lot of times they'll have little signs telling you what the rating is. And the rating is usually given by a wine expert or a magazine or something where their opinion matters. However, wine, like anything else that you taste, is a very personal and intimate thing. You may not like the same wines as other people. You may definitely not like the wines that the expert said were great. So it's one of those things that I'm always recommending that you look for. If you choose a wine that a wine expert gives a high score to and you like it, it's a probably good gamble that the next time you choose one of their highly rated wines, you may accept as well. However, I don't usually gravitate towards just those that have high ratings. Sometimes I will look for them if I want to try something new. I would say percentage-wise, I would say I disagree probably about 30 to 40% of the time. And that's just because I happen to prefer certain styles. I like a lighter, more complex style of wine. And I find that a lot of times the higher rated ones, especially the ones that we get up here in Northern Ontario, are always the big fruit bombs, the really big heavy duty wines. And that's just not usually my taste. So just like I recommend to others, basically use your own judgment. If you are the type, if you like a certain style of wine and that same style of wine is being rated highly by one of those wine experts or magazines, then it's probably a good probability that you're going to enjoy it as well. So last couple things before we leave, of course. Just a little reminder about the upcoming cruise for August 2018. We are still selling cabins right now through Expedia Cruise Ship Centers here in Ontario. You can just visit my website and look for the Travel with Stephanie section for more details. I've also included a link in the show notes. There is still a sale on, I believe, until the end of October, which is including the flight portion. So it's a really great deal. It's an all-inclusive river cruise in Bordeaux wine region with me. I'm going to be taking you to farmers markets, and we're going to do impromptu cooking classes and wine classes and tastings and all kinds of things to do with food and wine. Basically, you're going to have me at your disposal for the entire week. So it sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. I've already done 2 information sessions here in the Sudbury area already, and I know that we're planning one in November. So keep an eye on my social media channels for information about when the next information session is going to be, so you can come and get all the information about what this spectacular Uniworld River Cruise has to offer. Of course, I'm going to finish off with my thank yous. I want to thank you to Cynthia, of course. She is our regular contributor for wedding and events. We do have some other short interviews coming up, as well as we're going to plan another sitting around and drinking together and laughing about the good old days, and especially for the wedding episode, which I'm planning in the new year. So make sure you stay tuned for that. If you have any interest in looking at her wedding planning or event services, I've also included the link on the show notes, and she personally is listed on our contributors page, which you can find on the website as well. And of course, thank you to my secret servers here in Sudbury. Chatting with them that afternoon provided a lot of giggles, as you can tell, and it was really a fun group, and I can't wait to do it again. And if I have some time between now and the time this episode airs on Saturday morning, I will include some additional little fun things on the show notes, including some tips and tricks from some local specialists here in the Sudbury area about cocktails, which I think will just add a little extra flavor to your holiday season. And one last final little announcement. I was very excited this morning that I just was notified that Flying for Flavor is now on Stitcher Radio. So I'm proud to say that you'll be able to listen to this podcast on your Apple Podcasts system. You'll also be able to listen to it now on Stitcher Radio. And as always, I include the full audio version of this on YouTube, and there's a built-in player even on the website. So there's no excuse for not being able to listen. So whatever platform you prefer, my voice and my tips will always be there. So have a spectacular fall weekend ahead. Make sure that if you are drinking, please be safe. I will be when I'm down in Prince Edward County, and I will be chatting with you next week. Have a good one.